So next, I would like to introduce an old friend, actually, the Executive Director of the Space Information Sharing and Analysis Center, known as Space ISAC, Ms. Erin Miller. Erin has over a decade of experience building meaningful tech collaborations and has formed hundreds of partnerships between government, industry, and academia to solve problems for warfighters and national security. And I have to say, her and I used to be sort of tech transfer reps back in my Air Force days. So it is great to have Erin here with us to tell us what's going on with the Space ISAC.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone.
You could use this if you want. It's reliable.
I'll go with this. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Casey, for this super warm welcome, and to everyone here who has welcomed me back to Albuquerque. It's been a little while since I've been here, but I'm so thrilled to be back. I don't even know if I actually need to go through my presentation now that space systems are getting designated as critical infrastructure. I think we're set to go. So I'll just start with a question. I think we all could agree that space systems are vulnerable to cyber attack. That's a question. Do you all agree? Good, this is great, because back in 2019, not everyone could agree to that in a commercial, unclassified public forum like this. But I think we've seen enough public displays of attacks on space systems since then that we all should be eager and actually excited to have this conversation. So I'm going to talk to you today about some of the types of attacks or threats that are affecting space systems, and then also discuss a little bit about what's happening in our global ecosystem and how that's evolving around this topic of collective defense. Now I have to figure out how to change the slide. Right. So back in 2019, when the White House asked the private sector to stand up the Space ISAC, then they did this as a result of a study that was done by the Science and Technology Partnership Forum, where they recommended the use of an ISAC. Does anyone here actually know what an ISAC is? Are you familiar with other ISACs besides the Space ISAC? No? That's shocking, because all of the designated critical infrastructure sectors have an ISAC. There's a water ISAC, there's an energy ISAC, it's actually called electricity. There's an aviation ISAC, an automotive ISAC, and the list goes on to at least 16. There's also something called information sharing and analysis organizations, which also share threat and vulnerability information. So the reason why the Space ISAC stood up was to break down the silos of threat and vulnerability information sharing that had started to form over time, where we have now a burgeoning commercial sector, and we needed to have access to that threat intelligence. And in fact, the commercial sector probably has more access to that threat intelligence and can share it with one another even than the government in some instances. So this is our mission statement of the Space ISAC, is to facilitate collaboration across the global space industry, enhance our ability to prepare for and respond to vulnerabilities, incidents, and threats. And we do this as the primary communications channel for the space sector. So we are your sector ISAC. And we stood up an operational watch center in order to do this most effectively. So we are highly operational, based in Colorado Springs. We have a 4,200 square foot headquarters. And in March, we opened our watch center with our initial operational capability. Here's the model that we're employing. So we bring the public and private sector together. On the left-hand side, you can see the commercial companies. They represent across these different subsectors of the industry. And on the right-hand side, we have our partner agencies. Now, not all of them could even be listed on this slide, because there's at least 50 government agencies, US government, that have space as part of their mission. And when we come together, we share threat and vulnerability information, as well as do incident disclosure. And we use a variety of tools to do this through our operational watch center. And we can inform standards and recommendations and best practices for the industry. Now, I mentioned earlier that this is a global initiative. There are members of Space ISAC from all over the world. So here's our board of directors. You can see SES is on the founding board of directors. Their headquarters is in Luxembourg. So from the very beginning, this is a global effort. On the prior slide, there are government agencies from across the world that are our partners: ESA, JAXA, DLR. Here's the general members of the Space ISAC. These general members represent from across the world. KSAT is headquartered in Norway, it's Inspective in Japan, and the list goes on. So there are 70 members of the Space ISAC right now. And when we started 2023, our goal was to double our membership, and we will double our membership. The primary values and focus areas of the Space ISAC are to share threat intelligence and to create security and resilience for the global space industry. We do this through the trusted environment of an ISAC. ISACs actually have specific set of rules and regulations that allow them to share threat information among commercial sector partners and have them be protected from liability concerns. So you don't have this in other trade associations. This is specific to an ISAC. Here's a couple of numbers for you. I really just want you to look at the top. That's easy, it's after lunch. 88% of our member companies shared using our member portal during this 2022. This is actually from last year's data. And then we issued 577 alerts to our members. So when you answered the question, are space systems vulnerable to cyber attack? Then here's demonstration of that truly being the case, is that people are active and engaged and interested to see what are these 577 alerts that were published. Here's kind of an OV1, so to speak, of the threat landscape. But when you look at this picture, I want you to think a little bit about Russia-Ukraine. Because when you look at this diagram, then you can think through some of the different attack vectors and the TTPs and the APTs that are used to attack space systems. And think about the Ukrainian military leader who stood on stage at SSIB just a couple of weeks ago in Paris. And he briefed the commercial audience that he was working with the public and private sector to be able to collaborate to respond to these vulnerabilities, incidents, and threats. Now, how could we help him out and make it even easier and make all of our lives easier and have global collective defense? Here's one schema or taxonomy that's been created. This was created by the members of the Information Sharing Working Group of the Space ISAC. And I hacked this slide, I apologize, but kudos to the Aerospace Corporation for developing Sparta, which coincides with MITRE ATT&CK. I threw those on there, but the original construct is to show you really a definition of what are we protecting when we talk about protecting space systems. The link, space, ground, launch, and user are all included in that. And there are a variety of different cyber attacks that can affect each of those, but they have to be addressed in a holistic way. And another important facet of this is applying a mechanism for kind of a standardization, a schema, a taxonomy, so we can track the TTPs. We've evolved, our industries have all evolved where we need these type of toolkits to be able to operate effectively and share cyber threat intelligence effectively. So the Aerospace Corporation created Sparta, which now takes us into the space layer and addresses specifically the space layer in which MITRE ATT&CK can be paired with that to allow for cyber threat intel sharing. We use this in our watch center. And at the bottom, you're looking at the different threat scenarios that we're making available in our watch center. So our analysts are actively analyzing data sets to be able to distribute alerts related to purposeful RF interference, nation state actor activity, ground entry point intrusions, satellite maneuvers that are out of their normal pattern of life, as well as cyber threat intel. Enrichment, which uses a variety of tools and also connects to a 24/7 operations center called the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center. We also work with Kratos, their NOC, which is a 24/7 operations center as well. So this slide gives you an idea of the team of teams approach that we're using in Space ISAC. I really just bring this up so that you can see this is bigger than just tracking the adversary through ground into space. We're also thinking about the future, current and future. The cislunar affinity group stood up just recently to address threats to cislunar. I'm going to skip a little for sake of time. Okay, so we have talked about the Watch Center a bit, but I'm going to pivot to the Cyber Vulnerability Lab. So we also in our headquarters facility have a vulnerability lab that is used to conduct hardware and software testing, and we're bringing in agile teams of small businesses, academia, government, and using SBIRs, STTRs, and other grants to be able to do novel hardware and software testing. And the vulnerabilities that are disclosed through that, they don't end up in a SCIF somewhere. They're disclosed to in a controlled manner to the global space community. So the vulnerability disclosure process is being developed for the space industry through this laboratory. The Watch Center vision is to track the adversary through ground into space. So many of those vulnerability disclosures will go out as alerts through our Watch Center. And you can see a picture of it. We just had that display wall installed. We have IOC, and now we have a display wall to go with it. And you can see the analysts sitting in those different cells. So we have a coordination cell, a terrestrial cell, all source, signals, and space cell. And this is space ISAC analysts, but also members, companies that have assigned analysts to sit in this Watch Center environment, as well as government partners that have also assigned analysts to sit in this environment. So we're working closely with US Space Command and with US Space Force in particular, as well as the IC. They have a public-private partnership talent exchange program that you actually can take advantage of as well. As a commercial sector company, you can do public-private talent exchange with the IC. So a couple of things I want to touch on related to the international community, because space is global and undeniably so. We took a trip over to Paris and conducted an exercise at this ISAC conference. And at this conference, then I mentioned there was a senior military leader from Ukraine who spoke, but we also had a number of industry partners that formed teams and participated in Space ISAC's first international exercise, where teams from members from all over the world were able to look at ground station as a service, threats and vulnerabilities that would affect their company as a GSAS company, deal with the competitive environment, and put together their get well plan after being attacked. So they went through the whole process from beginning to end, and we were able to brief this global audience on the after action report, how it all went down. I don't want to spoil too much of it because this exercise is highly relevant. You will find many news stories actually that talk about what happens that this exercise is modeled after. And we did have a chance to talk to the Office of the National Cyber Director after the exercise to share with them some of the great news that happened at this event, which is that the EU is standing up an EU Space ISAC. And so in partnership with the Space ISAC that we have stood up, which stood up in 2019, there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and there's a lot of great things to happen as we use the follow the model and operate our Watch Center in partnership with Europe and Japan and Australia and others. Right, so just a quick wrap up moment here, because I know I need to give Casey back some time. I'm going to do some math in public for you. Ready? This is the only math you'll ever see me do in public. Space plus cybersecurity equals space system cybersecurity, but I have coded it so that you can see it's actually what that means is that we are vulnerable and we are networked, and so we need collective defense. And the reason why this is so incredibly relevant to today's meeting and conversation is that we actually have to then multiply this by the effects on all of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, because space is interconnected and dependent. There's interdependency with all of the other 16 critical infrastructure sectors. If you give an example of one sector and ask yourself, how does it connect to space? You will find an answer. There is interdependency with all of them. And so to the question of why is space systems not designated as a critical infrastructure sector, this may be part of it, just saying, because it's highly complex. For us to just add another 17th sector just kind of does deny this multiplication exercise that I've conducted for you here. So a couple of key important pieces of legislation have come out over the last couple of years. The Satellite Cybersecurity Act, as well as the Space Infrastructure Act. The Space Infrastructure Act actually does recommend that space systems are designated as a critical infrastructure sector. It died though in 2021. It did not make it anywhere. But the Satellite Cybersecurity Act is continuing to progress. It was reintroduced by the House, the Senate, not too long ago. So I would like to kind of wrap up on that note, because I know we have a whole policy discussion later that will be on this topic. Thank you. Can I take a question?
Thanks. I am Gil Klinger, representing Virginia Space Authority. There are 4 vertical spaceports in the United States, 2 federal, 2 state. They're not mentioned. They're not encompassed in any of the 16 critical infrastructures. They weren't mentioned other than inferentially, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But, and all my colleagues in the satellite business love when I say this, that all those billions of dollars invested in all those capabilities are expensive paperweights.
Mm-hmm.
And the 4 are vulnerable. They don't get routinely funded, either state or federal, certainly not from an infrastructure standpoint. And I'm just curious, I'd be interested in your perspective on that within the larger context.
Yes. So last year, ironically, at the Value of Space Summit, we did have a sensitive level briefing where we spoke with our government partners and with a broad representation of industry about vulnerabilities to spaceports. And if not for sake of lack of time, I would have talked about spaceports. I even have it in my notes because I don't forget about you. And the thing that I think about the most is the multi-state ISAC does exist, and there's an interconnectivity between state level government and the ownership, management, and control of those spaceports. So I think there's a lot of discussion to be had, and it definitely is included in the definition of the sector, in my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.